Welcome back, pro wrestling fans. Welcome back, IWC. It's your old buddy, the G.O.C. That's me. And you're here on Guardian of Chaos, the YouTube channel for Chaos Corner. Story time. Sit back and relax and enjoy. As the 1970s drew to a close, Jim Crockett Promotions stood among the top wrestling organizations in the world. The company's astonishing growth in the face of many trials and tribulations, from the sudden death of Big Jim Crockett in 1973 to the horrifying 1975 plane crash in Wilmington, demonstrated the extraordinary perseverance of the Crockett family. James Allen Crockett Jr., who turned 35 in 1979, was the captain of the ship. And he had not only led the group to its current success, but primed the promotion for further prosperity. The work of George Scott as Booker was equally instrumental, and his expert command of talent had created a congruent system and multiple layers, a feat rarely seen in wrestling. Now, a lot of that goes out to Dusty Rhodes as well. As we go on, you guys will see that in the history of what Dusty Rhodes did as a booker, as well as Ric Flair, Jim Herd, George Scott. A little overrated. If you go to the main two podcasts that I listen to, which is the Jim Cornette Experience and Story Time with Dutch Mantell, you'll learn a lot more. And during this era of the 70s into the 80s, and we talk about the NWA, I was in my late teens going into my early 20s, just to give you the time frame of where I was in life. Thanks for being here for part 2. Go back and check out part 1, the opening, the greetings, the salutations, the shout-outs, and you'll understand. His booking operations were consistent and realistic, and despite the longevity of some feuds, Scott's style of matchmaking kept the box office thriving, which I'm not sure if I agree with this point, but who am I to argue with Tim Hornbaker, who wrote this book, The Last Real World Champion, The Legacy of Nature Boy Ric Flair. But I'll listen to Jim Cornette and Dutch Mantell, who also lived it. An unbelievable read. I just purchased this. This is the first time I'm reading this here on Storytime for you, the fans. So if I get a little tongue-tied, not only do you guys like when I get tongue-tied, bear with me, because we're doing this together for the very first time here on Chaos Corner. The popularity of the sport was indisputable, with more than 1 million fans watching wrestling every week on TV across the territory. Crockett's 2 television programs, Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling and Wide World Wrestling, which is also Worldwide Wrestling. Hello, McFly. Anyone? Bueller? Bueller? Anyone? They were seen over 24 TV markets in the region, which at its height extended to parts of Florida and New York. Ratings were consistently high, and it wasn't unusual for the weekend showing of Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling to land a 25-plus share of the television audience in Charlotte, North Carolina. Always motivated to build his enterprise, Crockett understood the competitive nature of TV. He upgraded production values to remain ahead or at least on par with comparative programs. Remember, I'm reading this for the first time here on Storytime along with you, the fans, so cut me some slack. Bear with me, as I know my regular fans will. TV is the maker and killer of us all, Crockett said in 1979. Wrestling is just as entertaining and wholesome as anything on TV, including Mork and Mindy of Robin Williams fame. Weekly television production isn't an easy task, and it demanded a rigorous effort each week and every Wednesday. the WRAL studios in Raleigh. In addition to the slate of matches, Crockett and Scott had promos recorded that were individually curated for each market on the circuit. In that single day, they taped programming for both telecasts, as well as over 100 different interview segments to be edited into promotions for live events. And again, go back and check out the Jim Crockett experience, the Jim Cornette experience, and see how he lived through it through real time and how he breaks it down on his podcast. You won't believe it. It really is historic. As I said, you come here to learn things on this channel. It's not just opinions and viewpoints and fantasy booking and what you think about the current business. This is history, facts, reality. You learn things so you can have a conversation when you're talking to someone. And that's why you come to this channel, because that's what I present here. This is not a podcast, it's a show. Altogether, the television production cost $250,000 a year, but the exposure was everything to the organization. Our lifeblood turned out to be TV wrestling. Joe Murnick, a Crockett affiliate promoter in Virginia, told a reporter, "The crafty design of angles on TV, plus the madcap promos, were fantastic lures for audiences into arenas." And Murnick provided a great example of their recent success. He explained that they drew a $54,000 house in Norfolk one night and then $45,000 in Richmond the next. Now remember, triple that if you go to the money market machine from the 70s and 80s and the value of the dollar and whatever it is today. So if I'm telling you something is $40,000 or $50,000 and you put it into the calculator for today's times, triple that. Let that marinate, let that sink in, put that in your pipe and smoke it. Where was I? We were just $900 short of $100,000 for 2 successive nights, he said. In Charlotte, they averaged between 6,000 to 8,000 fans per show at the Coliseum, and they ran the venue about 20 times annually. The total gross in Greensboro in 1978 was in excess of $600,000. Again, triple that for today's market. And that'll put you into the reality of how much money they were really making back in the late 70s into the 80s in Crockett Promotions in the NWA. Really is astounding if you think about it. Bringing in and maintaining a roster of top talent was always a priority, and Scott helped Crockett develop a cast of characters that included veterans and up-and-comers. Now remember, Scott was there in the late 70s and was brought back in the late 80s. Remember that if you know your history. With a robust schedule, there was plenty of work to go around, and motivated rookie had a nice opportunity to gain experience wrestling around the horn. In 1976, the territory purportedly had 45 regular grapplers on the circuit and grew to 135 only 4 years later. Compare that to the rosters today of like AEW, which has, I don't know, 300 or 400 people on their roster. Just think about that. Put this in perspective. Remember, we're in the time machine. We're going forward to go back here. So remember the time frame of what we're talking about here. Scott had the depth in his talent pool to book A, B, and C shows in different towns, all in the same night. He could ensure that each program was filled with exciting and knowledgeable workers. It didn't matter if the show was in the Greensboro Coliseum or a spot show in Tappahannock. Say that 3 times fast. Tappahannock. Again, remember, I'm reading this for the very first time. The traveling was constant, and to earn a 6-figure income, it was mandatory. Not like today. Twice a week, if you're lucky. Some guys and gals, twice a month. Let that marinate, as I said. I know I'm repeating myself here, but that's what I do. In 1978, Wahoo McDaniel revealed that he spent $22,000 on flights over the previous year, and he wrestled 9 times a week on occasion. He estimated that he made $250,000 in revenue, which put him in the wealthiest class of wrestlers. Again, today that would be about $1 million. As one of the top draws in the business, McDaniel earned 8% of the gate for his matches. Ric Flair wasn't yet at that level. He received 5 to 8%, and it was reported he'd make $195,000 in his best year. With regard to his own schedule, Flair told journalist Mike Mooneyham, an unbelievable journalist, Mike and I follow each other on social media. His reports and his writing is second to none, Mike Mooneyham. In 1978, I wrestled 4 to 5 nights a week. I book myself and I'll wrestle 7 nights a week if they pay me enough. Over the course of 1979, Flair wrestled approximately 288 matches according to current records, averaging about 24 matches per month. And that was on a lower side for that point of time. When Flair became the world champion, it was much more than that. Try 30 or 35 times a month. How about that? However, the estimate is likely low because of incomplete television results from that year, as I previously stated. And again, I'm reading this for the first time, so that shows you my knowledge of what I know. And that's why you're here. My over 50 years, researcher, scout, agent, producer, fan, smart, Mark. You guys know the deal. And my 3 decades in this fucking business. However, as I said, the estimate is likely low because of incomplete television results. In January 1979, for example, he wrestled 26 bouts and had 9 days without a recorded match. 3 of those 9 days were Wednesdays when they taped TV in Raleigh. So do you understand? Do you get it? Results for those televised cards are unknown, so it's possible Flair wrestled an additional match or matches on any of those dates, pushing him up to 30 matches a month, at least. Even if Flair didn't have TV bouts on those dates, it's a good bet that George Scott had him in Raleigh to cut promos. It wasn't a day off. There was never a day off. Add in travel time, and there really wasn't much room left for the rest and recovery. His schedule was booked tight. On the bright side, not every month was as busy as there were opportunities for brief sabbaticals. The summer of 1980 was one of those times. After losing the U.S. belt to Greg Valentine in July, Flair continued his assault on his ex-partner in both singles and tag team affairs. Blackjack Mulligan was his ally of choice for a big contest against Valentine and Bobby Duncombe on August 23, 1980 at the Charlotte Coliseum, and Flair's team was victorious. The Nature Boy challenged Harley Race for the NWA World Heavyweight title on August 25, 1980 in Greenville, only to lose by countout, and then gained a draw with the champion the next night in Raleigh. Race was an indomitable spirit who had been the face of the NWA World Championship since 1977. He was already a 2-time champion. Entering 1979, a 2-time champion already. Race, a legend, a legit badass. And his total number of reigns doubled over the next 11 months after brief losses to Dusty Rhodes and Giant Baba. Each time the belt returned to the waist of Race, and his extended tenure as champion illustrated the continued support he had from the NWA's leadership. On September 4th, 1980, he again lost the championship contest in Japan, konnichiwa bitches, arigato from the Chaos-san, to Giant Baba. But he recaptured the belt before the tour was over. His September 9th win over Baba marked the beginning of his 5th reign for Harley Race. Less than 2 weeks later, Race, Baba, Flair, Crockett, and the members of the National Wrestling Alliance were in Reno, Nevada for the organization's annual convention. Wrestling luminaries from across the globe filled the Sahara Reno Hotel to greet old friends, brag about their accomplishments, and discuss key matters of the day. The convention consisted of gatherings of different size, tenor, and responsibility. There was a main assembly of all official members, as well as open meeting for members, affiliate promoters, and wrestlers. Committees of assigned officials handled an assortment of issues from membership to rule changes. Families were welcomed as well. Catered dining was provided at the hotel. Of all the distinct meetings during the convention, the one with the most consequence was the conference of the NWA's Board of Directors. Within an atmosphere of cigar smoke and high blood pressure, plenty of beers, were complex discussions about the future of the NWA. And particularly, who would wear the World Heavyweight title in the coming year. Does anything like that happen in current day? And I'm not trying to just pick on AEW, but do you guys understand where I'm coming from and what we're covering here? Think about it. The 9 members of the board brought their own preferences to the table that year and every year, and they argued the merits of the top heavyweight wrestlers in contention. The politics of wrestling was rife with the desire for supremacy. Generations of promoters going back to the end of the 19th century fought tooth and nail for national authority, influence, and of course the almighty dollar. The World Heavyweight Championship was always the ultimate symbol of power. And since the late 1940s and early 50s, the National Wrestling Alliance title was revered as the most prestigious in the sport. The hard work of the legendary Lou Thesz between 1949 and 1956 had set the standard for a nationally touring champion. That's why Ric Flair, I say, was the real champion during those days, although I grew up in the greater New England tri-state Northeast area, with Hulk Hogan, Bruno Sammartino, Pedro Morales, Ivan Koloff, Stan the Man Stasiak, Bob Backlund, Superstar Billy Graham. You guys get the difference between the North and the South in pro wrestling and world championships and who was the touring championship and the importance of the territory days. That's why you're here. This is priceless information and knowledge. Successors attempted to follow. That included Whipper Billy Watson, Dick Hutton, Pat O'Connor, and Buddy Rogers. Former footballer Gene Kiniski ended Thesz's final reign in 1966, and he carried the mantle until Dory Funk Jr. won the championship in 1969. Funk proudly wore the NWA strap until 1973, when he was dethroned by Harley Race. Race was soon beaten by Jack Briscoe, and in 1975, Terry Funk won the belt. These champions meant big money to promoters. They were idolized by fans for the distinctive traits, whether it was their outstanding sportsmanship or over-the-top villainy, and their positions as NWA title holders put them in a rare class that everyone around the business knew was special. The allure of money and power drew out the base instincts of promoters within the NWA, and annual meetings were often a battle royal of ideas and agendas. The 1980 annual meeting was no different, and the convergence of big personalities set up a hot debate as members sought a replacement for Harley Race. Of the 9 directors, Race's biggest advocate was undoubtedly Bob Geigel, a hard-nosed ex-amateur out of the University of Iowa. Geigel was a 30-year pro and had been part owner of Central States Territory out of Kansas City since 1963. Race was originally from northwestern Missouri, near the Iowa border, and was considered the territory's brightest star. In addition to his ownership role in the Central States area, Geigel had served 2 terms as NWA president in 1978 and 1979, and was well respected among his associates. Jack Adkisson was also a former NWA president who had the distinction of succeeding Sam Mushnick when he bowed out of the position in August of 1973. Known publicly as pro wrestler Fritz von Erich, Atkinson was the head of the Dallas territory and was a highly influential leader within the industry, with 3 sons, Kevin, David, and Kerry von Erich. in the infancy of their careers. Atkinson was playing a long game of politics and political chess with his counterparts, and he expected the NWA Championship belt to be passed on to one of his kin sooner than later. His oldest, Kevin, was 23 and only had 4 years of experience in 1980. David, who'd soon be acknowledged as the better candidate, was 22 years old at the time. Nevertheless, Atkinson's voice was important to other NWA promoters, and he'd have a say in picking the next champ. Wow. Board member Jim Barnett was NWA royalty and had been affiliated with the organization in one way or another since the early 1950s. However, it wasn't until 1969 that he became an official member, first representing Australia and then his territorial ownership in Atlanta. Barnett's role in the organization was substantial, that's for sure. He not only served as a secretary and treasurer of the NWA, but also booked the World Heavyweight Champion. That meant he was in charge of the champion's schedule, dictating where he went and when and resolving any conflicts between the promoters. That position elevated Barnett's influence tremendously, and he embraced the role. Vincent James McMahon of the World Wrestling Federation was another member of the board, and his remarkable success in the Northeast made him a power broker of great significance. His contemporaries respected his experience and knowledge immensely. Ron Fuller of Alabama, Mike LaBelle of Los Angeles, Victor Jovica of Puerto Rico, and Fred Ward of Georgia were members of the NWA Board of Directors as well, who each held a vote and offered their opinion on which wrestler was best fit as the traveling champion in their territory, hence the territory days, and how important, how much better, and how incredible it was, especially for the talent. Let's face it. There was one promoter without a board vote, but his influence was as strong as any of his peers. Eddie Graham of Tampa, Florida. Graham had served as NWA president from August 1976 to March 1978, but abruptly resigned, relinquished his seat on the board. The incessant politics, as well as stress and health problems, were rumored to have played a role in his decision, but despite his resignation, Graham's stature in the organization hadn't diminished one iota. Under his leadership, the Florida territory was thriving, and he had helped transform the American dream, Dusty Rhodes, into a household name. I hope you guys are taking notes. I really do. Take out your notepad. School is in session here on Storytime. In fact, all of the wrestlers working the national circuit, a few were situated better than Dusty Rhodes. He was a renowned star, a former world champion, and extraordinarily popular across North America. When Dusty comes to town, there's a little more excitement. That's an understatement. Wrote, let me just get the name correct, Bob Quincy in the Charlotte Observer in 1977. Rhodes was full of charisma and charm, and his connection to the audience was a bit different than Ric Flair's or other top-level heroes. He appealed to the everyman, and his dynamic personality captivated audiences in Florida, the Mid-Atlantic area, Texas, and wherever else he traveled, including New York. "The people clamor to see me," Rhodes said. "I've filled the biggest arenas in every major city in the country. I'm the biggest, toughest, strongest, prettiest wrestler in the history of the sport." That's my imitation of the American dream. In another interview, he compared himself to football legend Joe Namath, saying, "I like the fancy clothes. Although I usually dress Texas style, I saw Namath wearing an expensive coat, and I couldn't wait to get one. I had a $5,000 white mink made up for me." Not a very good impression, but that's my best shot, man. I used to talk to Dusty all the time. I've even met him and hung out with him a couple of times, and those are facts. That's why you come here, because my relationship and what I've done in this fucking industry. No, I never worked for the WWE. I never signed a contract. But I started my training in 1984, my journey in 1983, my debut in 1991, until my retirement of in-ring activity in 2008. And still here today in 2024, I'm active in Paradise Alley Pro Wrestling as a color commentator and play-by-play man. And still do the reporting and have this channel out of love, motivation, passion, a distraction, especially in this day and age. So that's why I love and respect you guys, and I hope you feel the same way about what I present to you here on this channel, on this platform, my platform. Graham sponsored Rhodes in his campaign for NWA recognition, resulting in the latter's 5-day reign in August of 1979. Other members of the board knew Rhodes' box office power, but were unconvinced of his long-term viability as champion, especially against babyface opponents. Interesting. Rhodes appeared to be out of shape in comparison to Harley Race and former champs, even though he was a far better condition than most realized. Don't judge the book by the cover. Dusty Rhodes was Graham's man, and he wanted Rhodes to dethrone Harley Race. Aside from Von Erich, Rhodes and Race himself, there were other names handled and bandied about the NWA in that meeting, mostly in a secondary fashion. Notably, Crockett was the 9th member of the board of directors, and his position within the alliance had increased greatly at the 1980 convention. His colleagues voted him the next NWA president, replacing Bob Geigel, and his success in the Mid-Atlantic territory spoke volumes about his managerial ability of Crockett's father, Big Jim, and had just joined the NWA in 1951 and served 5 terms as an officer in the organization, including 3 stints as the first vice president. He was never elected president, though, and his son's rise to the top of the alliance was a significant moment for Jim Crockett Promotions. It was also a defining moment politically for Ric Flair. For the past few years, Crockett had worked Flair's name into the national conversation behind the scenes, and he worked and wanted him considered for the NWA World title. The sport had seen the ascension of many talented up-and-comers, but in the opinion of Jim Crockett, none was more prepared to succeed Harley Race than Ric Flair. Flair's growth, both physically and as a personality, gave Crockett the leverage he needed to push Flair's candidacy. Although the Mid-Atlantic territory had never sponsored a homegrown talent for the top spot, Crockett was wise to the process. First and foremost, it was making an impression in St. Louis, and after a series of carefully booked appearances, Flair had established himself as a box office attraction. In Texas, Florida, Atlanta, and Toronto, he demonstrated his ring skills and showmanship, which increased the confidence promoters had in him. That was essentially what it was all about. The members of the NWA needed to know that the next world champion could navigate all the challengers of the job and the challenges of that job. From drawing fans to conditioning to just being mentally mature enough for the intense responsibilities. If Flair had a weakness, it was that he wasn't a shooter in the old school sense. He didn't have the amateur background of a Dick Hutton or Jack Briscoe, nor the pure toughness of a Harley Race. But the demand for a shooter to protect the belt from a rogue challenger wasn't like it used to be. Such a situation would probably never arise. But if it did, Flair needed the wherewithal to guard the strap by other means, by getting out of the ring or getting disqualified. To some old school promoters, this ability was still a factor in their decision-making. And I agree with that, as an old school guy myself. I mean, guys, do your research. Do your due diligence. As I adjust the chains here at Chaos Corner. There was another element at play at the time which revealed the power struggle within the NWA. Since the mid-1970s and the void created by Sam Mushnick when he stepped away from the presidency, the hierarchy of the organization had centered on 3 individuals: Bob Geigel, Jack Adkisson, a.k.a. Fritz Von Erich, and Eddie Graham. They took the helm of the NWA and steered things in the direction they wanted. Crockett became the first non-wrestler to take over as president since Mushnick. and the dominant rule of Geigel, Atkinson, and Graham was brought to an end. With that, though, there were concerns and borderline jealousy that Crockett would also gain control of the NWA World Heavyweight title. If they moved the belt to Flair, especially, obviously, Crockett would have control. It was an additional reason to oppose Flair as a candidate. The battle lines were drawn in the sand, and the board of directors voted out of principle, self-interest, and what they considered best for business. Flair, with his magnetism, resilience, and the rare it factor, earned the majority of votes 5-4. It's believed that Flair was supported by Jim Crockett, Jim Barnett, Vince McMahon, Victor Jovica, and Ron Fuller. And what may have been a compromise to appease Eddie Graham, Dusty Rhodes was chosen as an interim champion between Race and Flair. And Bob Geigel's Kansas City was picked as the location for the Rhodes-Flair title switch. Olive branches were extended in all directions to keep the peace. And with the convention over, the members of the NWA went back to work hustling for their next dollar. All right, fans, we're 30 minutes in here on this chapter. Unbelievable. So bear with me. We're probably going to go about 45 minutes. Don't go anywhere. This is just getting good. 10 pounds of gold. The political gamesmanship was exhausting. Crockett and Flair returned to Charlotte to resume business. And the build to Flair's fateful day in Kansas City was going to last months. Flair made the first leg of that journey in November 20th, 1980, when he made his Kansas City debut at the Memorial Hall. It was an introduction of sorts, and Flair humbly put over veteran Bulldog Bob Brown. 4 nights later, Flair beat Greg Valentine to regain the United States heavyweight crown in Greenville, South Carolina. His feud with Valentine earned a spot in the lineup of Crockett's Thanksgiving Night Spectacular at the Greensboro Coliseum on November 27th, and nearly 12,000 fans saw Flair win a brutal cage match. In JCP's other special holiday program, Flair again beat Valentine on Christmas night at the Charlotte Coliseum. While all these other things were happening, one of the biggest personalities in the history of professional wrestling arrived in the Mid-Atlantic territory. 26-year-old Roddy Piper. He entered the region in October of 1980 and immediately made his mark as an unpredictable, kilt-wearing, bagpipe-playing villain. His TV segments were full of life, and his charisma was off the charts. In the squared circle, he was an adept wrestler, and his previous tours in Southern California and the Pacific Northwest saw him win multiple regional titles, including the America's Heavyweight Championship in Los Angeles. Brawling was his real specialty, and there was a genius to his volatility. He could assail opponents in the ring with a rapid-fire barrage of fists or through his sheer wit in an interview. Remember, fans, I'm reading this along with you here on Storytime for the very first time. Without question, he was innately humorous, and for fans who enjoyed the creative sharpness of an indifferent heel out to hurt the promotion's popular stars, Piper was number one. Within weeks of his local debut, Piper captured the local television championship by winning a tournament final over Paul Jones in Richmond, Virginia on November 1st, 1980. At that point, I'm 17 years old, 18 years old, thereabouts. I failed math twice in college. I had to take it 3 times just to graduate, or at least pass the course. Non-credit math. What a mother effer that was. The prospect of bringing together 2 naturally gifted characters was too much for George Scott to pass up, and a Piper versus Flair feud began that same month. It wasn't the first time Flair had crossed paths with the hot Scott from Canada, as they reportedly had at least 1 televised match and 1 house show contest in 1973 when Flair was 24 and Piper was 19 and I was only 10. I lived this through my youth. You guys know that, right? because most of you in this community aren't my age and didn't live through this and didn't witness it live in real time and then go on to perform in the industry. And that's why you're here. Times were much different now, and both had since evolved into exceedingly confident performers. In fact, Piper was far above average as a trash talker, and his verbal torment of the blonde U.S. champion was probably harsher than Flair had experienced before in wrestling. Piper called him King Richard, made fun of his big nose, and in one interview called Flair the Mae West of wrestling. Flair wasn't the kind of guy to take insults lying down. He dished it out equally, calling Piper's kilt a skirt and referring to him as a punk. Their back and forth sparring was the epitome of entertaining, and they set the bar high for promos, which is one of the most important things in the business. You could have all the talent, in-ring talent that you want, but if you can't talk, how are you going to get over? And with that being said, you could have all the talent and the mic in the world, but in ring, you have to be at least decent or you're not going to get over. I'll take a guy who can cut a good promo and is just a so-so worker than a guy who's a solid worker and can't talk his way out of a paper bag, if that even makes sense. The passion of their rivalry was present in their matches across the territory, and their hatred appeared very real. At the Dorton Arena in Raleigh on January 27, 1981, Piper displayed his wicked tricks by knocking out Flair with a foreign object. He scored a pin and captured the United States heavyweight title. Of course, the Flair-Piper feud didn't end there and lasted well into the summer. It's noticeable that outside the ring, Flair and Piper were instant friends and shared a zeal for life. When they weren't hindered by the rules of kayfabe, what a great day and time kayfabe was, considering there's no kayfabe today. Kayfabe was real. It protected the business. It was a necessary. It made the business in the industry better. You guys and gals of today don't understand kayfabe. You talk about it like you do, but you don't understand it. When they weren't hindered by the rules of kayfabe and could be seen in public together, no night spot in Charlotte was safe from their shenanigans, and the stories of their antics are legendary. The Nature Boy and the Rowdy One were in a class of their own, as is Flair today still in 2024, but only as an asshole. That's right, Flair. I said it. As an asshole. You act like an asshole. Act your age. You can still be, you can still be Ric Flair without insulting people and being inebriated all the time, ruining your legacy. That's just my opinion. I will give you a personal opinion. George Scott, the man behind the exponential growth of JCP and a key player in the rise of both Ric Flair and Jim Crockett himself, left the company late in the first quarter of 1981. His 8 years, now in 1981, I'm 18 years old, I believe. I'm pretty sure. His 8 years as a booker had transformed the territory and changed the lives of many people associated with Mid-Atlantic wrestling. And as I said, if you do your research, George Scott's second stint as booker for NWA, Jim Crockett, WCW, whatever you want to call it, and it developed into, was a lot to be desired. And he certainly lost his touch. No offense, Scott. I'm just telling it like it is. I give you the good, the bad, and the ugly here. His 8 years as booker had transformed the territory and changed the lives of many people associated with Mid-Atlantic wrestling, as I just said. Just before his departure, he acted as a special referee for a handful of matches between Flair and Piper, including a few tag team bouts. On January 26, 1981, Scott returned to the ring to team with Flair in a loss to Piper and Valentine at the Greenville Auditorium. With a job as booker for Georgia Championship Wrestling in Atlanta, Scott wasn't going far in terms of physical distance, but his exit marked the end of an era for Jim Crockett Promotions. Ole Anderson, one half of the famed Minnesota Wrecking Crew, was hired to book JCP, and there was confidence that his fresh perspective would keep the promotion's success going. Flair was getting closer to his date with Destiny, In the Mid-Atlantic territory, he continued to war with Piper and Valentine, which also saw engaging in a long, grueling battle with Ivan Koloff. He was a regular in tag team matches, working with Wahoo McDaniel, Blackjack Mulligan, and others against either Piper and Valentine, Piper and Koloff, or the Anderson brothers. But more important to his future as NWA World Heavyweight Champion, Flair was back on the road to fulfill dates in Kansas City, St. Louis, Tampa, Miami Beach. Between May and September of 1981, he wrestled prospective future challenges for his championship and put each of them over. Now, how about that? A time-honored tradition. Does that go on today? I don't think so. I'm not sure. By losing matches to Jack Briscoe, Mike Grand, Ted DiBiase, and others, he created future matchups that would drum up interest in various territories once he won the title. The momentum was building and Flair was perfectly positioned. His work was pristine. His undying enthusiasm was respected by promoters. Between April 22nd and May 5th of 1981, he ran a streak of 13 straight days of bookings, which included 20 matches in 5 states and 2 countries. Let me say that again. Between April 22nd and May 5th of 1981, listen up, current talent, current fans, current marks and smarks, he ran a streak of 13 straight days of bookings, which included 20 matches in 5 states and 2 countries. His tolerance for long trips on the road was tested and tested again. He made regular stops in Atlanta to work the Saturday telecast on WTBS, the station known formerly, anyone? Bueller? Anyone? As WTCG, and received extensive nationwide exposure. Compliments from respected announcer Gordon Soley were invaluable. Finally, with this political wrangling over and the table set, Flair was headed for Kansas City to participate in the biggest match of his career. Take out your notebooks. The date was September 17th, 1981, and the arena was famed Memorial Hall, a landmark venue steeped in pro wrestling history since it opened in the mid-1920s. The building had showcased luminaries of the sport from Joe Stetcher to John Pesek to Buddy Rogers. Orville Brown, the very first National Wrestling Alliance World Heavyweight Champion, was an icon at the Memorial Hall in the 1940s. And it was fitting that 40 years later, such a consequential match returned to the same setting. To add luster to the affair, promoter Bob Geigel imported former NWA title holder Lou Thesz to be the special referee, and appeared that history and tradition were being acknowledged in the most appropriate way. Dusty Rhodes was the defending champion as planned, having won the belt from Harley Race on June 21st in Atlanta. As previously noted, Rhodes had a personal mentor to Flair early in his career. Had been a personal mentor to Flair. Remember that. Remember, Ric Flair wanted to be Ricky Rhodes. Flair looked up to Dusty Rhodes. Dusty Rhodes was the American dream, especially through the 70s, into the 80s, even into the 90s. And Ric Flair, when he first came into the business, again, I'll say it, I'll repeat it, he wanted to be Ricky Rhodes, the younger brother of Dusty Rhodes, or at least a relative. So, true facts, true stories. And again, I'll say it, that's why you're here. The fact that Flair was in this position facing Rhodes seemed to speak to the manipulations of the wrestling gods. Or was it fate? If that kind of thing is even to be believed. I'll let you guys be the judge. The match itself was exciting from beginning to end, from pillar to post and coast to coast, lasting just under 24 minutes. I threw that in there. You know that, right? Pillar to post, coast to coast. At a crucial moment, Flair locked in his dreaded figure four, and Rhodes was unable to break the hold. In the center of the ring, Rhodes writhed in pain and reached out for the ropes as Flair increased his leverage to secure a submission. Moments later, Dusty turned the move over and got his head under the ropes, causing Fez to break the hold. Flair didn't waste a second. He rushed the corner post and went up to the top, but Rhodes was wise to this effort. He caught Flair and maneuvered his body for a big suplex out of the corner. After getting Flair up, Rhodes' knee buckled from the pain, and the two men dropped to the canvas. Flair landed on top in a pinning predicament, and Fez counted 3. The Nature Boy Ric Flair was the NWA World Heavyweight Champion and the new owner of the legendary 10 pounds of gold. The friendship between Flair and Rhodes had been so important to Flair early in his career. They traveled the highways and byways together. They shared beers and laughs, wrestled in Japan, and formed a brotherhood that appeared unbreakable. Now, as they stood at the top of pro wrestling's proverbial ladder, they were being pulled apart by ego and the extremely competitive nature of both men. The respect between them remained, and the spirited rivalry between Flair and Rhodes was just beginning. Their greatest battles were yet to come. Thank you, fans, for being here for 10 pounds of gold. I can't thank you enough. I'll repeat it and repeat it again. I can't thank you enough. Much love and respect, and I hope you thoroughly enjoyed story time, and especially this episode here on Chaos Corner. I will be back to continue with many more shows, much more here on Storytime, including this incredible book by Tim Hornerbaker, The Last Real World Champion, The Legacy of Nature Boy Ric Flair. Wow. And we will go on to the next chapter, which is Diamonds Are Forever. I'll say that to say this, because I tell it like it is. Don't you dare miss it.